Daniel Cross was the respected security businessman. Leah Cross was the devoted wife who rescued animals. Maya Rourke was the glamorous newcomer who no one really knew. Together, their lives formed a hidden triangle of passion and betrayal, a triangle that would explode one cold November night, leaving one woman dead, one man in a hospital bed, and an entire town asking who had really planned the killing. Greyhaven looked like the kind of town that never made headlines. Rows of pastel houses sat neatly along the windy coast, the smell of salt water always in the air. People left their doors unlocked, waved to the postman, and gathered for Sunday markets. Among the faces everyone recognized were Daniel Cross and his wife Leah. They seemed carved out of a picture-perfect advertisement. A handsome couple in their early 30s with matching smiles and a home that caught the morning sun. Daniel owned a small security company that installed cameras and alarms in local businesses. Leah spent her days at the animal shelter, bottle-feeding kittens and organizing adoptions. To their neighbors, they were proof that good people still lived simple, honest lives. But appearances are a fragile thing in Greyhaven, and the Cross household was already beginning to crack. Daniel's business had grown quickly, forcing him to travel for installations in nearby cities. At first, Leah was proud. She told friends he was building something that would keep them comfortable for years, but as the trips lengthened and the calls shortened, she found herself eating alone at a table built for two. In the evenings she would stare at the half-cold dinners she'd cooked, wondering what had changed. Daniel came home tired, distracted, eyes glued to his phone even as he kissed her on the cheek. He was still polite, still affectionate in small ways, but there was a distance in his voice she couldn't name. Leah kept busy at the shelter, throwing herself into volunteer work, but she noticed her hands trembling when she signed adoption forms. At night she lay awake, listening to the wind rattle their windows, waiting for Daniel's car in the driveway. When it finally appeared, long past midnight, she pretended to be asleep. She told herself it was stress, that he was working hard for them, but somewhere deep down she felt the quiet weight of being left behind. Daniel, for his part, believed he was holding everything together. He convinced himself that the long hours, the mysterious invoices, the secret trips, were all part of a harmless escape he could manage. He liked the thrill of stepping outside his routine, liked feeling noticed again after years of routine domestic life. He had no idea how transparent his changes had become. He had no idea that Leah's watchful feels were beginning to follow him. The town around them remained oblivious. At the market, people complimented Leah on her new haircut, and asked about Daniel's company. She smiled, answered politely, and tucked her suspicions away like a folded note in her pocket. The white brick house by the sea still looked perfect to everyone driving past. But inside, two people were drifting into separate worlds, neither ready to admit how far they had already gone. The storm that would rip their lives apart was still gathering far offshore, invisible to the neighbors, but its first winds were already moving quietly through the Cross home. Daniel's work brought him into countless homes and offices. But the day he stepped into the new luxury apartment building on Harbor Street, something shifted. He had been called to install a custom surveillance system for a fitness instructor who had just moved into town. Her name was Maya Rourke. She was unlike anyone in Greyhaven, confident, vibrant, always dressed in colors that caught the eye. While Daniel checked wiring and mounted cameras, Maya stood nearby, asking questions about the system, leaning on the doorframe as if she had all the time in the world. She laughed easily, and her laughter echoed through the spotless apartment. For Daniel, exhausted from months of routine and silence at home, the sound was intoxicating. At first, their interactions were purely professional. He explained how motion sensors worked. She offered him coffee. But small gestures grew into longer conversations. When Maya mentioned she was new to town and didn't know anyone, Daniel felt an impulse to be her guide. He gave her the names of local restaurants, told her about the best walking trails near the cliffs. A week later she sent him a message, thanking him for his suggestions. Another week later, she invited him for a coffee at a small cafe on the edge of town. He told himself it was just friendliness, nothing more. The cafe meetings became their ritual. Maya had a way of making Daniel feel as though he were the only person in the room, as though she could see past the layers of husband, business owner, and provider into something freer and younger. Daniel began rearranging his work schedule to pass by her apartment. He bought new shirts, changed his cologne. He told himself it was harmless, that no one would get hurt. Yet at home, Leah was already noticing the gaps in his story. Leah saw the late nights, the phone buzzing with messages he didn't explain, the extra care he took with his appearance. She tried to dismiss it as paranoia born of loneliness, but then there were the unexplained receipts for cafes she had never visited. The faint trace of perfume she didn't recognize on his jacket. Each clue lodged itself deeper in her mind like a thorn. She began to watch him more closely, quietly testing his excuses, noting his movements when he thought she wasn't looking. She didn't yet know Maya's name, but she knew a shadow had entered their marriage. Meanwhile, Daniel believed he was living a double life no one could see. He returned home, with small gifts for Leah, thinking they would mask his absence. But his eyes flickered toward his phone even as she unwrapped them. The illusion of control gave him a strange thrill. He didn't realize how quickly the walls around his secret were crumbling, or how closely Leah's eyes were following the cracks. Rain fell over Greyhaven in steady sheets the evening. Leah stumbled upon the truth. She had been searching for a photo she had saved months earlier on Daniel's spare laptop when she clicked into a downloads folder she had never noticed before. Inside were images she couldn't mistake. Daniel sitting at an outdoor cafe with a woman she didn't know, the two of them leaning close, laughing, their hands almost touching. Another image showed them at a hotel lobby in a city 2 hours away. The date stamps lined up perfectly with Daniel's supposed business trips. Leah stared at the screen for a long time, her heart hammering. Something inside her went cold, and then a hot wave of disbelief rolled through her. The man she had built her life around was living another life without her. She closed the laptop, but the pictures kept playing behind her eyes. For hours she sat in the dim kitchen, the only sound the ticking clock on the wall. When Daniel came home late, smelling faintly of rain and a perfume she couldn't place, she smiled automatically and said nothing. She realized in that moment she didn't want a confrontation without proof. She needed to know everything before she moved. Quietly, she began to follow him with a discipline she didn't know she had. Leah started by checking his calendar against his bank statements. She learned which cafes he visited and when. She copied numbers from his phone while he slept, later matching them to unknown contacts. She even visited a fitness studio under the pretext of joining a new exercise class, only to find herself staring directly at Maya Rourke for the first time. Maya was younger than her. Confident, radiant, Leah felt as if she were seeing a ghost of her former self. She left the studio shaking, a polite smile on her lips, but rage burning in her chest. Days turned into weeks. Leah's notes filled a small notebook she kept hidden under towels in the linen closet. Times, locations, purchases, even the color of Daniel's shirts. She watched him slip further from her while telling their neighbors everything was fine. The more she learned about Maya, the more she felt humiliated. It wasn't just an affair. Maya had a pattern. She had been linked with other married men in other towns, each story ending with sudden cash transfers or broken homes. Leah began to see herself not only as a betrayed wife, but as a woman being played for a fool. Her friends noticed she was quieter, thinner, her eyes rimmed with red. She brushed off their concern with excuses about work and allergies. Inside, she was changing. She felt a dark clarity settling over her, an idea taking shape in the quiet hours before dawn. She would no longer wait for Daniel to tell her the truth. She would uncover everything and decide her own justice. Leah's private pain began to harden into a cold, steady resolve. She no longer cried at night. She planned. The notebook that had started as a collection of clues turned into a blueprint for action. Page after page contained not only dates and times but sketches of faces, license plates, even maps of the places Daniel and Maya met. She realized that gathering evidence had given her a strange sense of control, a way to stop feeling like a victim, but control was only the beginning. In the dim light of her kitchen, she started searching online for things she had never dreamed of typing: ways to catch a cheating spouse, ways to trap a blackmailer, ways to protect assets from fraud. Her history became a catalogue of dark possibilities. One evening, the private investigator she had hired called with an update. The report was worse than she expected. Maya, it turned out, had a documented history of dating wealthy men and quietly threatening to expose them unless they paid her to go away. Some had settled, some had lost businesses or families. Leah read the dossier twice, her hands trembling. She no longer saw Maya as just an interloper. She saw her as a predator circling her life. If Maya had already targeted Dadel's company, then everything Leah and Daniel had built together could vanish. The betrayal cut twice as deep by her husband, and by a stranger who might ruin them both. Leah began to think about ways to stop Maya. At first it was vague, a warning, a confrontation, perhaps legal action. But as she lay awake at night listening to the sea outside their window, darker thoughts crept in. She studied Daniel's insurance policies and noticed the size of the payout if he died. She read articles about sedatives, about how long they stayed in the bloodstream, about objects in the home that could be turned into weapons. She told herself she was simply understanding her options. Yet each search felt like a step across a line she could not uncross. Outwardly, Leah became quieter and more deliberate. She told Daniel she was starting a new wellness routine, which explained her hours away from home. In reality, she was driving past Maya's apartment at night, noting the lights, the entrances, the cameras. She learned the layout of the building as if rehearsing for a performance. She watched Daniel's moods carefully, memorizing his habits, anticipating his excuses. She began to imagine not just discovering the truth, but staging it, shaping it, turning the tables so she would not be the one exposed. The people of Greyhaven still saw the gentle animal shelter volunteer with a soft voice and warm smile. They had no idea that inside her mind she was assembling a plan as precise as a puzzle, each piece designed to fit perfectly. She felt almost detached from herself, like an observer watching a story play out. A story where she was no longer the wronged wife but the one holding all the cards, waiting for the right moment to act. The night everything came together was colder than anyone expected for November. A sharp wind came off the water, rattling loose shutters and scattering leaves across the empty streets of Greyhaven. Daniel received a message on his phone just after dusk. A short line from Maya. "We need to talk about our future. Come tonight." It felt urgent and final. The kind of message that made his chest tighten. He left the house without telling Leah where he was going, assuming she would be asleep by the time he returned. He didn't notice the faint glow of the hall light switching off behind him as he pulled the door shut. Maya's apartment was quiet when he arrived. The blinds were drawn, a single lamp casting a muted glow across the living room. Daniel stepped inside and called her name, but no one answered. On the coffee table sat 2 mugs of tea, steam curling faintly upward. He set down his keys, confused. He didn't see Leah slip from the shadow of the hallway, her face pale, her eyes fixed on him. In her hands she gripped one of the heavy wrenches from his tool bag, a piece of equipment he had left in the trunk of his car after a job. The weight of it felt strange, metallic and cold, but she held it as though she had been rehearsing for days. Maya entered moments later through the back door, surprised to find Daniel standing stiffly in the middle of the room. She opened her mouth to speak, but froze at the sight of Leah behind him. For a heartbeat none of them moved. Neighbors would later tell police they heard a single dull sound, then nothing at all. When officers responded to a noise complaint hours later, the apartment was dim and eerily still. Maya lay lifeless on the carpet, her dark hair spread out like a fan. Daniel was slumped near the kitchen counter, unconscious from a blow to the head. Leah was nowhere to be found. The scene was chaotic, yet strangely deliberate. There were no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints on the weapon beyond Daniel's and Leah's, no clear explanation of who had done what first. Investigators collected the mugs of tea, the wrench, and Daniel's phone with the message still on the screen. The tabloids would later call it the Greyhaven Triangle, a deadly collision of passion and betrayal in an otherwise quiet town. People who had known Leah at the animal shelter shook their heads in disbelief, unable to reconcile the gentle volunteer with the image of a woman wielding a weapon. While paramedics rushed Daniel to the hospital, police began a search for Leah. Roadblocks were set up, motels checked, friends questioned. The white brick house by the sea stood empty that night, lights off, curtains drawn. A storm had moved through Greyhaven, but the real damage was just starting to unfold, and no one yet knew how much darker the story would become before the truth emerged. For 3 days Leah moved like a ghost through the outskirts of the county, checking into a run-down motel under a false name, and keeping the curtains shut tight. News reports about the Greyhaven Triangle filled every channel. Images of Maya's apartment flashed on screen alongside Daniel's hospital photo. Leah watched them silently from the edge of the bed, the blue light of the television flickering across her face. Each time a knock sounded from a neighboring room she flinched. She told herself she needed time to think, to prepare her version of events, but she also knew the net was closing. Patrol cars had already been spotted circling the highway exits. She hadn't slept more than an hour at a time since the night of the attack. When police finally found her, it wasn't after a dramatic chase but during a routine sweep of motels near the interstate. She opened the door slowly, hands trembling, and surrendered without a word. Officers later said she looked exhausted rather than dangerous, a small woman in a faded sweater clutching a half-empty suitcase. At the station she asked for a glass of water and then began to speak. What she said rewrote the narrative. Everyone thought they understood. According to Leah, she had gone to Maya's apartment that night to confront them both, after discovering a plot to kill her for an insurance payout. She claimed she had overheard them planning to drug her coffee and stage an accident. The wrench, she insisted, was self-defense when she believed Daniel was about to attack her. Investigators were skeptical at first, but toxicology reports on Daniel's blood revealed traces of sedatives inconsistent with anything he had been prescribed. There were also unlabeled capsules found in Maya's kitchen drawer. These pieces of evidence complicated the case, hinting that Leah might not have been the only one planning something dark. Prosecutors now had to untangle overlapping motives: a betrayed wife, a manipulative girlfriend, a husband caught between them, and money large enough to tempt anyone. The story spread nationwide, each headline more sensational than the last. Talk shows debated whether Leah was a cold-blooded killer or a cornered woman striking back at a trap. The trial began months later in a courthouse packed with reporters. The prosecution painted Leah as a calculating spouse who lured Daniel and Maya into a confrontation she had planned for weeks. The defense framed her as a victim of manipulation, who fought for her life. Witnesses testified about Maya's history, Daniel's business finances, and Leah's sudden transformation in the weeks leading up to the crime. The jury deliberated for days. When the verdict was read, manslaughter instead of murder, gasps filled the courtroom. Leah showed no visible reaction as she was led away. Even now, the full truth of that November night remains blurred. Some believe Leah's story, others see it as a clever defense. Daniel recovered physically, but refused to testify publicly, retreating from the town that had once admired him. The white brick house stands empty, its windows dark against the sea, a silent reminder of how quickly a perfect life can unravel and how many secrets can hide behind a single door.